Even though this is only the fourth entry in the series, it kind of feels like a culmination of a lot of different topics that have come up so far in the Defining 25. Like adaptation, this film has a penchant for metatextual writing style. Like Akira, this was more of a slow burn movie for me, one that I had to learn to appreciate over time. And like American Psycho, it was most certainly a comedy, but definitely not your standard set-up punchline kind of humor you would find in a more mainstream affair. With this video, I want to talk about something that has come up on multiple occasions, but until now has never really been the central focus of any of these videos. And that's how, over time, I've gone from someone who prioritizes a good plot in a film to someone who now cares much more about whether or not a story has likable characters in it. This evolution has been a pretty fundamental change in the way I view movies, or really just art in general. And you know, strange as it may seem, sometimes that profound kind of change can come from the strangest of places. Which is why today, believe it or not, the movie we're going to be talking about is The Big Lebowski.
This one we sort of figured, you know, if things are become a little bit too complicated and are unclear, it doesn't really matter. I mean, the plot is kind of not the... and again, this is similar to Chandler. The plot is sort of secondary to the other things that are sort of going on in the piece, I think. And if people get a little bit confused, it's I don't think really necessarily going to get in the way of them enjoying the movie.
When I first watched The Big Lebowski, the idea that a movie's plot could be considered secondary was utterly preposterous to me. After all, I thought of myself as someone who really cherished a good story with strong writing, which I assumed by definition meant that the plot had to be central to a good movie. But that definitely isn't the kind of film The Big Lebowski is, and yet I enjoyed it anyway. Now, I wasn't really sure what it was I liked about the film after my first viewing, but I did find it engaging enough to want to watch it again, and after I watched it for a second time, I got that same feeling, only a little bit stronger, until eventually I just considered The Big Lebowski one of my favorite movies, period, even if at the time I didn't really know exactly why that was. If we were to sit down and try and analyze the film from solely a narrative perspective, The Big Lebowski is essentially a noir, or that is, at least a 90s stoner comedy that uses a lot of disparate elements of noir. It's got a detective of sorts, an inciting incident, an increasingly complicated mystery, a missing woman, a case of mistaken identities, wealthy benefactors, double crosses, and third act revelations. All the hallmarks of the genre are present here. But it doesn't really feel right to call The Big Lebowski a noir, does it? And not just because it's mostly only using these elements for comedic effect. Like Joel Cohen says, it's not a movie about plot. The A to B to C of the story doesn't really matter. It's the characters that matter. In a lot of ways, The Big Lebowski kind of feels like a writing exercise the Coens gave themselves to try and break through a serious case of writer's block. Like they were challenging themselves to see if they could write an entire movie where the main character is completely passive, where none of his actions are what actually drives the plot along, and he is instead shuffled from one scene to the next by all the side characters around him. And if you're trying to make a comedy out of that, well then what better genre to lift from for your unambitious main character than a mystery, thus all the noir elements. Honestly, it's kind of amazing a movie that structurally sounds like a college-level writing assignment ends up full of characters that feel so human. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way the Coens actually write and construct their characters. When you hear them talk about how they come up with the people that populate their movies, you'll often hear them say how they wrote that character with a particular actor in mind, or based them off someone they knew in real life. For instance, Jeff Bridges' character, the Dude, was based off a real guy the Coens were friends with, who actually went around calling himself the Dude. This in turn breathes a lot of life into their characters, makes them feel more actualized. They all of course have their own personalities and characteristics heightened, but usually in a stranger-than-fiction sort of manner. So while most Coen brothers characters come off as more than a little eccentric, they're usually also pretty believable. Like, to me, The Big Lebowski feels a lot like a buddy cop movie starring your hippie uncle from your mom's side of the family and your Vietnam War vet uncle from your father's side. In fact, and I'll probably take some heat for saying this, but really the only character that sticks out like a sore thumb these days is the Jesus. He feels like another writing challenge the Coens gave themselves, but this time in a bad way. Okay, so let's get John Turturro to play a rival bowler in this movie, and let's dress him up in a skin-tight purple jumpsuit. That'll be funny, right? Yeah, that's good, but we need something more. How about he calls himself The Jesus? Oh, and while we're at it, let's make him a pedophile too. He kind of just feels like a South Park character that got airdropped into this movie, and thus feels woefully out of place because of it. Sure, everyone in the film has a certain level of absurdity to them, but there's a mundanity to everyone else's depiction that is lacking with the Jesus. Plus, I mean, it's not specific enough to be stereotypically racist, but it still feels a little gross in 2019, right? But aside from that one blemish, The Big Lebowski is otherwise filled to the brim with likable characters. I mean, sure, the dude and Walter are a couple of doofuses, but I also find them really endearing. And I think the reason I like watching The Big Lebowski so much is just as simple as that. It's got characters that I enjoy spending time with. That's why this is such an important film for me personally, because it's sort of like a fulcrum movie in my life, where I learn to appreciate stories for something other than just a gripping narrative. Does every plot point in The Big Lebowski line up? Does the mystery make sense logically? I don't know. I think the better question is, does that really even matter? Well, it may seem insignificant now, since this particular movie uses its character-centric brand of storytelling mostly for comedic effect. There are going to be some other films coming up later in the defining 25 where this aspect is going to be much more vital, and I'm happy The Big Lebowski helped me become someone who could appreciate that better. I used to be someone who only saw a movie through the writer's eyes. They were like these elaborate finished Lego sets that I had to deconstruct and put back together without any instructions to learn how the pieces fit together. And that, in and of itself, isn't necessarily a bad thing. There are still plenty of movies I enjoy doing that with, but I don't think it's beneficial for that to be the only way you look at film, or any kind of art really. In my mind, that approach ultimately leads to a pretty troublesome style of criticism that takes a lot of our personal relationships to work out of that equation. Being able to see a story through its characters' eyes is how films and other forms of narrative art can generate empathy within the audience. They expose us to new experiences, grant us greater understanding we wouldn't gain from just our own perspectives alone. I could sit here and force myself to do a deep dive on the themes that play within The Big Lebowski, or I could list off the other allusions to cinematic genres like the Busby Berkeley sequence. But I think the most important thing is, I don't feel like I need to do that to enjoy the movie. It's nice to just sort of sit back and relax and spend a little more time with these characters, to just let the movie happen to you. And you know, I can think of worse things to take away from a movie than how to just, well, as the dude puts it, abide.